Peter Tench was an async researcher who was transported into the future 2 weeks during the events of Informational Video. But what exactly happened to him after that isn't exactly clear. Many are willing to accept Async's description of the events as it regards to Peter Tench. In Damage Control, they explain that Peter was thrust into the future in a flash of blue light, where he eventually made his way back to the threshold. In that time, however, Async had already faked his death, and they would need to hold him for a while to reintegrate him. He began exhibiting signs of paranoia and hallucinations. He claimed to believe that he never actually left the complex at all, and that he had yet to actually find the exit. Then he escaped back into the complex. He was missing for quite some time before he reappeared and shot an Async researcher, escaping from Async headquarters entirely. Async claims he was killed falling down a hill as he escaped. Given that the amount of information we have surrounding the events is limited anyways, it's difficult to make a judgment about what really happened. On the surface, the events and motivations make sense. It would make sense, too, that Async would need to hold Peter for some period of time while they worked to reintegrate him, legally, back into society. That would suggest that prolonged exposure to the complex could have adverse psychological effects. However, Async's recollection of events begins to unravel when we look deeper into their description of Tench's mental state. They describe Tench as displaying signs of paranoid schizophrenia, a mental illness which he had not previously displayed any symptom of, and a mental illness which they also say they had no reason to suspect he was afflicted of. This specific description is quite interesting, given that schizophrenia most commonly develops in young adults aged 19 to 25. Given that the speaker in the video may not have been a psychologist or psychiatrist, it's likely that they were using the term schizophrenia to refer to its symptoms, as opposed to offering a diagnosis. In any case, the description of Tench as displaying symptoms of schizophrenia seems to suggest he was psychologically evaluated. Async even acknowledges that he never displayed any symptoms of schizophrenia before, so there's reason to be suspicious of this description. Moreover, Tench's behavior as he escaped is not consistent with somebody experiencing psychosis. As Tench makes his way back through Async's headquarters, it's clear he knows where he's going and what he's doing. Not once does he stop to get his bearings, or even to turn around. He's completely lucid. Tench's diagnosis was faked, so that Async could continue to run tests on him without his consent, and he escaped back into the complex with the knowledge that he could find another null zone to escape from Async out of. In Informational Video, Tench and 3 other colleagues entered the complex on an expedition. Tench wanders around a corner when he hears a cacophony of noise. Although he urges his colleagues to follow, the lights suddenly flash blue, and they're gone. Async asserts that the moment his coworkers disappear is the moment that Tench is transported into the future, and on the surface that would appear true. It is, however, telling that when Tench called out to his colleagues to come and take a look, they completely ignored him. Instead, I propose that the moment Tench wandered into the hallways was when he was transported into the future, and that the blue light we see later was just time catching up with itself. I.e., he was already separated from his coworkers temporally, and the blue light was just the complex's way of returning Tench to the present. From here, Tench wanders around the complex until he returns to the threshold, which is now being built up, consistent with what we see in presentation later in the series. However, in that time since, Async has already faked his death, so he cannot legally be integrated. Clyde's description of Tench's mental state from recording 14 matches what we might expect. He's disoriented and doesn't know who Clyde is, since he's suddenly 2 months in the future. Given that Tench was found after hours, Tench was taken in secret, maybe even promised reintegration initially, but that much is unclear. In Damage Control, Async claims that he was held for 2 weeks, and some basic tests were administered to try and discern what happened to him. They claim that due to sensory deprivation, he began to exhibit symptoms of schizophrenia around the end of week 2. So Tench was found on May 8th, 1990, and near the end of week 2, i.e. May 21st, 1990, he began to experience psychosis. Many have suggested that Tench's prolonged exposure to the complex drove him insane. They assert that this is consistent with other characters in the series, i.e. that getting lost in the complex leads to people going insane. The strongest argument in favor of this is what happened to Clark in the movie. By the end of the movie, it's revealed that Clark has killed his assistant manager, Kat, and has littered her body parts around the complex. He scalps the red-headed still life and rests its hair on Mary so that he can roleplay his sick fantasy of yelling at his wife again. However deranged Clark's actions are in this scene, he's far from experiencing any psychosis. He's not hallucinating, His speech is coherent, he's aware of his surroundings. While I'm no mental health professional, I don't think the complex had a hand in worsening Clark's state of mind. Clark is shown to be stubborn and resistant to, if not incapable of, change. Clark was already very far gone at the beginning of the movie, when he reveals at the end that he never wanted to change in the first place. Clark was already like this. The complex just gave him a place to act on his instincts, free of consequences. Moreover, if the complex did have adverse effects on human psyche, then we would see more evidence of that in Found Footage 3. As Ravi explores the complex, he continues to behave as though he's aware of his surroundings. He even remembers places he's been before and laughs to himself when he sees the Red City for a second time. There's no credible evidence in Found Footage 3 that would suggest that Ravi's psyche is being affected any more than would be typical, i.e. he's experiencing no psychosis or other delusions. In fact, given that Ravi claims he's been walking for 9 hours, it shows that the complex has little, if any, effect on the human psyche. It stands to reason that Peter's mental health should have remained intact as well. On May 22nd, Tench escaped back into the complex, where he would reside for 3 days until the night of May 25th. During that time, he was likely searching for null zones to escape out of, as evidenced by his map on the wall in Reunion. More evidence of that supports his lucidity would be how he attacked Mark in Reunion. He tackles him, and then grabs the gun and then points it at him. It's in Reunion that we also learn that none of the other employees were told of Tench's return on May 8th. After shooting Mark, he escapes through the threshold, holding other employees at gunpoint long enough to get by them. That Tench was able to escape implies he was loose enough to recall the exits and that he was not hallucinating. Although he was disarmed, he managed to escape. Since we've established that Tench was lucid and not experiencing any psychosis through any of the time, it begs the question, why would he run from Async in the first place? There's very little to go off of, but Tench seems to suggest that Async had no plans to reintegrate him. In Reunion, he claims, "This is what they did to me," as well as, "I had a wife and kid," seemingly implying that they wouldn't let him see them. Async suggests they weren't able to get any useful information from the test that they ran on Tench, but they also suggest he was held in some sort of solitary confinement. They attribute sensory deprivation to Tench's state of mind on May 22nd when he escaped, but we know that he was in Standard from May 8th until May 22nd, not in the complex. They likely held him in solitary confinement so that they could run more tests on him. What they were looking for in those tests is unknown. Async proclaims him dead a second time, claiming he tripped on a rock on the side of a hill and died. In the final moments of damage control, however, we see a man running into the city who is heavily implied to be Tench. Tench is alive, somehow, although his whereabouts are unknown. The complex is difficult to understand, and although the parallels to Lovecraftian horror are present, the complex is not so vast as to cause insanity. That would contradict the multiple found footages, the movie, and Tench himself. Tench was brought in by Async, tested on, and left to rot in solitary confinement. When he escaped back into the complex, there was no search party sent out to find him. When he escaped Async as a whole, they declared him dead and asked everybody to move on. The key here is that Tench never exhibited the disconnection from reality most commonly found in people with psychosis, as Async suggests he was experiencing. Tench is likely just one of Async's many victims to come, such as Mary Klein. If there were any hope for Peter Tench, who knew his way around Async and everyone within, there would be no hope for Mary, certainly. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for this time next week where we talk about Ivan Beck and his connection to the complex, whether or not it's more literal or it's a more figurative connection. And please consider subscribing so you don't miss that.